The natural drift is for something from finance to insurance. I tend to always, I'm not going to give my whole anti-Warren Buffett lecture here, but I think there's a way in which Buffett was prescient and ahead of the curve and basically reoriented most of his businesses towards insurance companies in disguise, which is sort of the world of indefinite pessimism, and that's what dominates in that sort of world. And we can sort of see how this indeterminacy affects us in very, very many different fields. So if we look at politics, in an indeterminate world, the most important position in politics is the pollster. And what do you do in politics? Nobody has a clue, but what you do is you take a poll, and the polls tell you what to do. They don't really tell you anything on a long-term basis, but they sort of tell you incrementally what you do at any given time. And as we've tracked towards this more and more indeterminate world, there's a way in which poll taking has become more and more dominant. And so the way we talk about political campaigns and elections is sort of how are people doing in the polls, much more than what ideas they're talking. It's sort of, if Martin Luther King were here and said, I have a dream about a future that's really different, the question would be, how does that poll? It would never, and that's sort of the way we avoid this. There obviously are cases where this goes very badly wrong. My sort of Exhibit A, and my apology to all the Sarah Palin fans in the audience here, but people always say it's this incredible mystery why McCain picked Palin in 2008. I think it's not a mystery at all. The basic heuristic was that you looked at all the Republican senators and governors. In 2008, Republicans weren't very popular. They were mostly running around 40% in the polls. Palin was at 85% in Alaska because when oil was $140 a barrel, Alaska was like Kuwait. Everybody was getting huge checks from the government of the state of Alaska. She was polling extremely well. And so there was no question that you would go with the person who polled the highest. And so you went with Palin, even though perhaps it couldn't scale to the U.S. as a whole because the U.S. was not producing way more oil than it was consuming. And so, and then there sort of are ways in which, the 2012 re-election gets recast as a contest between, say, Nate Silver and Dick Morris. Silver was a better poll taker, and so he won, rather than that Obama had better ideas or the ideas resonated better or that's what people wanted to hear. It's not the substantive way that we talk about politics. To talk about government more generally, even though government spending is still about the same as it has been for the last 50 or 60 years as a percent of GDP, more and more of it is shifted towards transfer payments, which are, of course, a way of saying that the government has no ideas on what to do with the money. It simply moves it to other people, and it's assumed that the people have ideas, but you don't have specific ideas of what to do. There's a way in which you can see indeterminacy in literature, and sort of if you sort of take some classic science fiction, the 1960s space Odyssey classic. The text was updated automatically every hour. One could spend an entire lifetime doing nothing but absorbing the ever-changing flow of information from the news satellite. So a specific, definite view of a radically different future, which maps reasonably closely to today's internet. Neuromancer, 1984. The sky above the port was the color of television tuned to a dead channel. Future is fundamentally static. If you think of it in terms of philosophy, there sort of are different ways to map these quadrants, but I would say the optimistic indeterminate quadrant is fundamentally the quadrant of someone like Rawls or Nozick. People normally think of them as opposites, but they're really both in the same category. Nozick is sort of the libertarian version. You have no idea what to do, and therefore the individual is paramount. Rawls, you're in a veil of ignorance. You have no idea what society you will be born in, and therefore social democracy is paramount. You get to very different ideas, but they both take their starting point from sort of complete indeterminacy about the state of the world. The classic determinate one, you could be on the left, you could be on the right, but there was some sort of Marx, Hegel, all these people where there was, even going back to Bacon or lock. There was some sort of definite way that things would get better, and you could sort of work towards a better future in one way or another. And then, of course, you have the determinate pessimistic, indeterminate pessimistic, which I think tend to be the more classical ones. The determinate pessimistic would be like Plato and Aristotle. There's a definite way things happen, even though there's sort of limits, and you can't be too hopeful about technology or really improving the state of the world in any fundamental way. And then probably the classic version of indeterminate pessimism, and I think this is sort of the philosophical category that we're back in, is sort of the Epicurean Lucretian view of the universe, where there's nothing but atoms in the void. The atoms randomly move throughout the void. They sometimes bump into each other. Stuff happens. Eventually they break apart. Things fall apart. Chance erodes everything. There's nothing specifically you can do that makes any sense. Everything things sort of all go to pot. Marijuana farming might be a good thing to go into in this world. But basically, this is actually in some ways become the dominant view, and it ends up being sort of strangely stoic, because there's really nothing you can do about these larger forces that will ultimately buffet you, and the most you can hope to achieve is a certain amount of equanimity and indifference about the fundamental randomness and meaninglessness of the universe.